welcome to Classically Imperfect, a student-run mental health organization dedicated to helping young classical musicians struggling with mental distress. My name is Mary Elizalde. I am one of the co-founders and the director of operations of Classically Imperfect, and today I'm joined by Marquise Lindsey-Bradley, who is a recent college graduate and who we got into contact with through Project 440. Hi Marquise, how are you?
Hey, I'm doing pretty good. Thanks for having me, and I'm looking forward to getting into our discussion.
Mhm. All right, so before we begin, can you tell us a little bit about your background, like how you got into music, how you got connected with Project 440, and what schools you went to?
So I am, like you said, a recent graduate of the Cleveland Institute of Music and Case Western Reserve University. I started playing when I was 10 years old. I started playing piano with my school district's music teacher, and it didn't really work out. A lot of the school district programs were being cut with their funding, and a lot of teachers were leaving to suburban school districts. So uh, I just kept losing my piano teachers. So I started looking at other instruments. And after trying some violin, cello, I eventually landed on clarinet. And at that point, it was pretty obvious that that was like the instrument for me. And I started private lessons at Temple University's music prep school. And then I went to the Creative and Performing Arts School in Philly, Kappa High School, and that's where I really started, taking it up a notch and not just taking lessons, but also doing youth orchestra and other programs, which is kind of how I found Project 440 through my school district's youth orchestra, the All City Orchestra. Joseph Conyers, who's the founder and now the vision advisor for Project 440, he became our music director, and he started incorporating Project 440 programs into the all city curriculum. Still, it wasn't mandatory, just after rehearsals, they would host different sessions on college readiness, resume writing, always something directly related to the kind of skills that we were going to need moving forward. Both for people who wanted careers and music, and then also for people who were just looking to pursue any other kind of profession. So that was my intro to Project 440. And over time, throughout my 4 years of high school, their programs really grew into something closer to where they are today, where they have their main program, Instruments for Success, Doing Good, and YAC. And I participated in all of them back in the day at different times. And I was like, my friends and I were kind of the guinea pigs of Project 440 programs because we were doing many of them in their first years.
Mhm.
Uh, so we got to still work with some very, very smart mentors, people who had really great careers in music or in business. Uh, and yeah, so I was working with Project 440 a bunch while I was in high school, and my friends and I really enjoyed it. I then graduated and went to the Cleveland Institute of Music and spent my 4 years there studying pretty intensely. Of course, my degree was, I call it the COVID sandwich, as I was a freshman and things were normal. And then COVID was in between. And then I came out as a senior and things were closer to what they looked like before.
Mhm.
And yeah, that's pretty much been the abbreviated version of my journey.
No, yeah, Project 440 definitely has a bunch of courses also for kids around the country because I'm from Los Angeles. So I got into contact with Project 440 through my youth orchestra, which is Yola. And then I did the Doing Good course, and that was kind of how we got involved with this organization. That's where it kind of originally started. So I think it's a really cool program for people everywhere, really. So, my first question for you is, how was your college audition process? Was it more positive or negative? Can you give us your point of view?
Yeah. It's always hard to view things in like positive or negative. I found that like in life, there's usually a much more nuanced mix of both. But I like to think that I was very prepared for the process, largely due to Project 440 and just so many of the other organizations I was working with and mentors that I had. and who are still even a part of my life. So I had a lot of support in terms of knowledge and understanding like what that process looked like, as I was coming from a household where I was the first in my family to go to college. So like my mom didn't have much of an understanding of what that process looked like. My sister, I have an older sister, and she went to college for a little bit, but she ended up taking just starting working and then going back later. So I was really relying on all of my other programs to help steer me. And Instruments for Success, and specifically Sigas Lani, who was the primary teaching artist for that program, was a huge help in just laying out what the process looked like. And I took that class as a junior, so I really got to uh, plan ahead in a way that was in line with my goals, but also fully comprehensive in terms of learning what I wanted from myself. So that was like a huge part of that experience for me in the process. It's not just, making sure you're meeting the deadlines and getting your audition requirements ready, even though there's so much that goes into that. Even before then, you have to figure out if that's what you want to do. And that's my junior year is really where I say I started focusing on the college process. And it definitely started with looking at myself and figuring out, like, what am I good at? What do I like to do? What is competitive between like my interest and my skills, that, because I needed scholarships or I wasn't going to be able to go. And like that was made abundantly clear to me. So it definitely started with figuring out my own goals and interest and how that works into a competitive college application process.
Mhm.
And then going for it, laying it all out, understanding, which schools am I auditioning for. Since I like through that process of self-exploration, I learned that like, I need to go to a conservatory because I am not studying for the SAT the way some of my other friends are.
Mhm.
And that's not going to get me the scholarships that I need. But I will practice my excerpts and my etudes and get those to a level where when I take it to a conservatory that is awarding scholarship on merit, then I will be in the best position to do well. And so that was like from the helicopter view, my process. And then in terms of the day to day, it was really sticking true to it, learning to practice when I didn't necessarily feel like it or felt like it, and yeah, saying no to a lot of the social things that were going on. And it's not like I had an abundance of free time. I was still like, playing in two different youth orchestras and a chamber ensemble once a week, and still obviously still taking lessons, practicing, doing Project 440 programs. My friends and I were running the Center City Chamber Orchestra through Doing Good. And so I had a pretty packed schedule. So being able to just manage my time in a way where I was doing all of the things that I needed to be doing to stay on top of my goals became just the ultimate priority at that point.
That's probably the hardest part about being a musician is just trying to find extra time for solo. For me specifically, I have only started private lessons 3 years ago, so I've only been doing solo for 3 years, and it's kind of at first when I jumped into it, it was a little hard to manage everything, especially going between like school and orchestra and other extracurriculars, and it was really hard to manage at first. Now, during the summer, I feel like it's gotten a little bit better, but I think that's one thing that most musicians really struggle with is time management. Another question that I have for you is how or did the college audition process affect your mental health?
Yeah, I should preface this. I think I kind of mentioned it loosely, but I went through that process before COVID.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's worth noting because there's like the research has shown this, and I think all of our personal experiences have reflected the fact that life changed completely. And the conversations around mental health also really broadened after COVID. There's a language, we all have access to a language to describe the feelings we have. And there's just more cultural sensitivity towards that. So just in general, when I was doing that process, mental health was like not something that people talked about. And even in all of the classes I was taking, it was, uh, it wasn't a priority the way it is now, which is why I really have a lot of appreciation for what you and your team are doing at Classically Imperfect because it's necessary. But I I really consider it too much. It was just grind, 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 and I yeah, it was hard, especially once we got into the swing of auditioning, where like, every other week I'm in a different city and, school doesn't necessarily stop at that point. So it's like, I'm still working on my research paper for my project in school. And I had won a concerto competition and so I was playing like two different concertos and keeping those in my head.
Mhm.
And the pressure of just walking into a room and knowing that these 10 minutes are going to determine a lot. And I had to learn how to deal with that. Something I did to manage my own kind of emotions and mental health through the process was that all of the time I spent organizing my auditions. So I did all of my auditions. Most of them I went to on my own. So I was flying around a lot. I had a lot of friends, or two friends specifically, who were doing auditions as well. And we overlapped a lot. So I usually end up traveling with a friend of mine or just going on my own and seeing people there who I knew. Uh, but I always found somewhere to get ice cream or frozen yogurt after every audition I took because and I knew and I did it ahead of time because I was already planning like, all right, where's my hotel or the place I'm staying and where's the place where I'm auditioning, like school, and which room is it in, and like all of these things. And then after I did that, I go, and now where am I going to get my ice cream afterwards? Because no matter how the audition went, I knew that the ice cream was going to make me feel better in a way that either it was like, yes, I deserve this for playing a great audition, or you know what, even if it wasn't a great audition, I deserved it because I know I worked hard leading up to it and I did my best. So that was like something very small that I kind of just did on my own. No one really feels good after auditions unless it's like the best one. But even then, like, sometimes you can't always trust your own emotions while you're feeling them. So it was helpful for me to anticipate. Then in the day to day, I made sure that I just stayed social. I am an extrovert, and I didn't, but also as musicians, we have to spend a lot of time alone practicing the craft. So I was pretty intentional about how I spent my free time and my social time. So I didn't say no to everything. Like there were definitely times where I could have been practicing, but I instead chose to like go to a movie with my friends because like and also like it's like two of my closest friends, especially while we were in high school, we were all taking auditions during the same time, and we felt it. So we made time for each other outside of the hustle and bustle, like even if that's like going to get pho after rehearsal or just doing something before and meeting up before things. Uh, so just being intentional about how I spent my free time outside of practicing, performing, rehearsing, studying, all that fun stuff was really great for me. And I must say, I went through kind of a terrible thing. I don't think about it as much these days, but when I was in the middle of my audition process, it was in February of my senior year, my instruments were stolen. And it
Oh.
was like, that was probably to this day, one of the like most challenging
Mhm.
periods of my life where like just mentally I was just lost.
Yeah.
Like I'd done like half of my auditions and then I was at this event and I had all of my stuff in a place where we were told we can keep our stuff. And it was like a bunch of people's instruments lined up, but somehow mine were the one, uh, my instruments were the ones that got snatched. And
Oh.
like I was like dealing with all of that. I still had auditions the next week. I was still performing like, concertos, and I had to
Mhm.
figure out how in the world am I going to get a set of instruments that one are like actually at a professional level where my instruments were, and then two, figure out how I can get adjusted to them. So I was grateful to have like a lot of connections in Philly and people who really supported me so that they found someone to lend me instruments and for the rest of my auditions.
Mhm.
And that was like such a hard process because, I felt like all of this preparation has led up to these moments. And then, like, when you least expect it, life does what life does. And
Mhm.
figuring out how to, redirect your energy at that moment. Like, I literally remember I ran out of school. Like, it happened over a weekend. And then Monday came. I still hadn't had instruments. I'd been talking to the cops, like,
Mhm.
filing police reports. Nothing has shown up. And I was just like, oh my God, I have half of my auditions left, and it's like all of the schools that I actually want to go to,
Mhm.
these big concerts coming up, and I don't have instruments, and I'm sitting here in a class not learning anything, like in school. And I just like left. I didn't ask to go to the bathroom. I didn't do anything. I just got up and walked out of the school, and I turned my phone off. It scared a lot of my friends and teachers. I would not suggest doing that. So, for all of our people listening, do not leave school if you're not supposed to. Um, but I did do that, and people were like freaking out. And I just kind of, and it, looking back at it, it's something that, like, I definitely, uh, not in such an extreme way, but that's something that I do for my own kind of mental health. It's to remove myself from like the stressful situations
Mhm.
and just take the time to exist, breathe. And I had to like see myself as not just like, I'm not just a clarinetist. I am not just a prospective college student. That is not my identity. Sure, it can feel that way, especially for the months, the even like almost like the 6 months leading up to it. And then while you're actually going through it,
Mhm.
you're spending so much time focusing your energy in this one thing, in these few different goals that you set. And I had to take my time to just strip my identity of those things, uh, and just breathe and say, okay, my life isn't ending because those instruments are gone. And
Mhm.
at that point, like, I collected myself. I let out a lot of tears, and then I walked back into school as if nothing happened. And everyone's like, "Oh my God, they were announcing your name on the speaker. We were calling you. Never do that again." And I went to a pretty relaxed school, so like I wasn't in trouble. People were more so concerned for my safety and like all these things. So it all worked out. I ended up, I did my auditions. I had some results that I was happy with. Uh, but yeah, that was just like one of those things in my life where even to this day, like I don't think about it that much, and I
Mhm.
rarely talk about it because it was such a stressful time in my life. Uh, but also, I got to learn a lot about myself and how I react to stress, and it's definitely been a point of growth moving forward.
I'm so sorry that happened to you. I feel like if that were to happen to me or any of my friends, we would have done the exact same thing. It's just something so, especially during college auditions, that's quite tragic. One question that I have is kind of more on the rejection side. How did you deal with rejection and how did this affect your decision making for colleges or if you got rejected to any schools at all?
Yeah. I was not one of those people who got the 100 straight across the board. Um, so yeah, I dealt with rejection pretty much every step of the process. Like, I did pass all of my schools for pre-screening. Uh, even after I took a lesson with the teacher, and the teacher's like, "Oh, you sound great and you're prepared." And then, so like there are things like that that happen. And what I've learned from like the college audition process and then auditions that I've taken later as well, and having so many friends who are all going through the same things, you can't let it stop you. You can't waste time feeling sad. Like, of course, have like, there's going to be a normal reaction, an emotional reaction to
Mm-hmm.
rejection. Like, we're humans. We don't like being told no. Uh, but there's the kind of reality of the work that we do as musicians, where most of us, the vast majority of us, are told no more than we are told yes. And uh, that, I understood that then. Of course, it's different when it actually happens to you. Uh, and yeah, I didn't allow myself to get hung up over it because I knew that I was going to have good options. I applied to enough places and that were different, but also similar, that I knew that I was going to have at least one option that I knew I would have been happy with. And so, like, I kind of banked on that. But also, it's just like, oh, okay, no, they said no. That's cool.
Mhm.
Uh, and just moving on afterwards, like, I know what I did. I know my own preparation. And the reality is that I do every single thing that I could have done during that process to get to where I needed to be competitive for that specific school, or and then there's also that element of, like, their relationships are a part of this, and connections, and there were places where I had connections, there were places where I didn't, but that doesn't always mean you're going to be successful or not. But so much goes into those decisions that uh, I just didn't let myself spend too much time being upset or holding grudges. Like, oh, this teacher said that I played great. If I didn't play great, then why did they? Like, all of these things.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I think I've just taken it, brushed it off, moved to the next one. Uh, and that's been my process. It still works for me. Yeah.
That's a great perspective. Do you have any tips for any rising high school seniors, like how to prioritize their time?
Yeah. So I recommend everyone have something that looks like this and something that looks like this.
Mhm.
And a journal. So when I'm saying a practice journal, I think really helps focus your goals and the everyday work that you put into it. And understanding that everyone learns different. So for some people, like, they need to write it down or it just won't happen.
Yeah.
Other people, they can kind of do it every once in a while. But I think learning your own organizational habits and getting just some sort of routine around measuring how you're making progress. And that can be as simple as, even not even just writing it in a journal, but just on your music itself, like writing your tempo goals, or having some people do like the 3 to 5, like, play it 3 times at this tempo and then move on and then do it again. And just having some kind of organized way to structure your progress. So not just so that you know what you have to move towards tomorrow and next week, but also when you've been practicing the same thing for 3 months, you can look back at where you started and give yourself some perspective to know, like, sure, this week it's maybe isn't getting, you're not getting faster, or you're playing with more tension, but you're also doing much better than you did 3 weeks ago. And you can see that through the proof in your writing and your journal keeping. Uh, and so that's been helpful for me. I even write like little words of affirmations, or different, like, motivational things to myself. It's like, keep going, you got it. And like, I do little things like that to, like I said, to before, I kind of anticipate those days where I'm not going to be feeling up to it.
Mhm.
Uh, and journaling is one of those things that I do, where I can write notes to myself. I even do it with some of my alarms. Like I set alarms when I practice. Another great thing I think that can really help you organize and structure your time, which is usually limited. So, like, I'll pull up an etude, and I say pull up because I use an iPad for
Mhm.
my, so it's like, I'm not really, yeah. So I'll like pull up an etude, and it's like, all right, for the next 15 minutes, this is what is going to occupy my practice time. And then, like, I set the alarm and almost forget about it. And then I isolate the things that that are going to be challenging. Uh, so that's timers, journaling, and also recording. And I swear I don't do it enough. My teacher, he would always say, well, are you recording? You know how it sounds. And I've had so many teachers at this point, and they all kind of say similar things
Mhm.
in different ways. but I had a teacher at Kinhaven with a summer camp that I went to in Vermont, and he'd always go in a sarcastic way, "You know what a good clarinetist sounds like you know what a good sound is and a good tone." And I said, "Yeah, yeah." He's like, "Okay, so just make one." I should say he also was a really great teacher. Know how to listen to music
Mhm.
and determine, what's good about it, what needs work, and we're developing such a nuanced and refined ear. It can be hard to hear ourselves with that same ear in a way that isn't judgmental. And so recording often is one of those things that eventually doing it over and over again, you're not just, it's like listening to your own voice. No one wants to hear themselves speak. I'm sure when you post this, I'm going to hear my own voice and cringe. But eventually, and then get to like the core of what's happening. And so in playing, you know, after listening to it once, you can you'll hear like that voice in your head saying, "Ah, you messed this up," or "Ah, that wasn't like that." But then you can start thinking objectively and saying, "Well, how's the rhythm? How's the intonation? How's the quality of sound?" Like these are the objective things that no matter what genre of music you're playing, no matter what instrument you're playing on, they're always going to be at the hierarchy. They're always going to be at the top of the hierarchy of things that you're going to be judged on in an audition situation. And so that's why recording is helpful, because you can take the time to listen to that. And then even video recording as well. Like, you can see your posture. You can see, like, for wind players, it's an embouchure thing. For string players, it's a bow hold or the position of the instrument. So between those three things, journaling, recording, and uh, wow, the other thing that I just completely blanked on that I said, feel free to fill in the blank there. Sorry, just like escaped my mind. But yeah, those are the things that I would recommend.
Yeah, no, definitely. I also barely record myself. I can't do it, and my teacher is always on me about recording, but it's just something that always slips my mind. And I used to also do practice journals, but as time went on, how did you manage to like continue to do your practice journal and like just be motivated to do it? Because I started doing it this summer, but then I got back to school and I just completely stopped, and it was just I just couldn't do it anymore.
Yeah, a friend of mine, he's someone who, and this is going to be a side tangent, but a friend of mine, he's really into meditation, and he said this to me once about meditating, and because I tried it for a little while, and he says, meditation isn't something you start doing; it's something you stop doing.
Hmm.
And I think about, and journaling can also be a form of meditation or a kind of a mental health practice that you engage in and hopefully build a habit around so that you can find that way to connect with yourself. And I think that journaling is definitely one of those things. It's, once you start, you don't really stop. You just get back, you go on and off. And so and it's perfectly natural. I do that, like, especially, like, I tend to journal more when I'm preparing for something very specific. If that's an audition, a recital, or something like that, or just preparing a piece that's like, a huge piece and it's core repertoire. So I try to get a practice plan going around that. So like the way I journal is definitely, it morphs. Some days, well, not some days, but for some time periods, like I said, like leading up to my senior recital, that was like I kind of organized my practice journal in a way where I kind of isolate, these are the solo pieces, and then I also had a bunch of other music to learn for gigs and for chamber music. So I would organize my repertoire in a way so that even if I'm not taking daily notes, I'm staying on track of like, okay, this one section in the development just needs a lot more focused practice, isolating finger position, like things like that. And then like some things are, I don't need to touch on this every day, but maybe I do, like, I've played it before, I've performed it like last year, but I still need to make sure I have it. So I'll like practice it for a couple of days, maybe do a run through once a week. And so you can kind of start to get some sense of a hierarchy of what needs the most work and what things are you still have to keep under your fingers still, but you don't have to turn the metronome down to 60 to do it. So just being flexible with yourself and allowing yourself to be flexible is really helpful, especially with a habit like journaling, because the reality is most people are not I should, especially while you're a student, when finals and midterms come around, it's hard to continue practicing at the same rate when you actually have other classes that are going to require more time, or essays do, and
Mhm.
like some things going on with your chamber groups. So the balance changes a lot where, sometimes we're performing more than we're practicing. And it's just important that when it's time to flip, that you're prepared to pick up where you left off with your technique and some of those more ongoing developmental things that we practice.
What is one last piece of advice you can give our audience that you wish you had known before your college auditions?
I think just being able to go for it. Uh,
Mhm.
there, there's this idea. I think we have an idea about fear that we don't like to admit that we're afraid.
Mhm.
Uh, but admitting and accepting and acknowledging that fear that we face as performers, as audition takers, it can kind of cloud us, and we can leave it there, or we can pretend like it's not there, and then when you get into it, it's like whoa. Uh, but just allowing yourself to kind of feel uh, that pressure sometimes and then sitting in it and saying, okay, sure, I'm nervous, but also I can do it. Uh, and that's something that I've had to deal with in my own performance, where, and people, especially non musicians, they ask me, like friends that I have and family members, are like, oh, so you're just like not nervous when you go on stage? It's like, oh, God, yes, I am. Of course I am. I'm a human. Uh, but also you can do things while you're afraid of doing them. And an extreme analogy would be, jumping out of an airplane. Like, you have your parachute, you've been briefed on what you need to do. It doesn't mean that you won't be scared as you're getting ready to jump or as you are falling, but
Mhm.
also we do have the ability to do great things. And sometimes fear and anxiety and stress, nerves we can channel that energy and focus and redirect it to a place that does give us the motivation to do it. And I think that's what separates, the top performers from those who even remove themselves from the practice room or don't go as far as they can to push themselves as an individual when they're working on it. Because once you accomplish the goal, that's the
Mhm.
same way that I take my losses, even the success that comes, I celebrate, but then it's quickly time to move on, because the next level, everyone else around you has done that too. And we're all just trying to constantly improve. So I guess that's like my long-winded way of saying, acknowledge the fear and the nerves and anxiety that comes with it, accept it for what it is, but don't let it get you down. It can always be redirected and refocused into something that can energize you to get to the next step.
Thank you so much for joining us today. I think this interview was really enlightening for both me and all of my friends who are going to be auditioning for colleges this year. I'm not going to be auditioning because I'm planning on majoring in psychology, but I still want to do music during college. But most of my friends are going to be auditioning, and right now is when they're really prepping for it. So I'm sure this advice would really help them. If you want to learn more about Classically Imperfect, make sure to visit the link in our bio. Thank you so much again for joining us today, and bye.